Welcome back to the Paranormal State, Washington, and UFO UAP. With Makāula Nakae, a lifelong experiencer and ET contactee since 1990. Today's episode, late 1970, Tall Gray, Dr. Paradigm. The evolution of the tall gray in ufology and abduction lore. While the standard 3 to 4 foot gray alien became a pop culture icon in the mid-negative 1960s, largely cemented by the Betty and Barney Hill abduction case in 1961. Ufologists and abduction researchers soon realized that the gray hierarchy was not one-size-fits-all. Hidden within thousands of hypnotic regression sessions were accounts of a much more imposing authority figure, the tall gray. The evolution of the tall gray, from early encounters to the 1980s Dr. Paradigm. The emergence of the tall gray as a distinct entity in ufology did not happen overnight. It evolved through decades of investigative fieldwork, hypnotic regression sessions, and the courageous accounts of individuals who stepped forward to report experiences that defied conventional reality. A deeper look at the historical milestones and research frameworks reveals how this commanding class of beings went from a vague anomaly to a central pillar of modern abduction lore. Early precursors, the 1960s and 1970s Foundation. Before researchers formally classified a towering managerial tier of grays, early contact cases contained critical structural hints that something larger and more authoritative was directing the phenomenon. The Betty and Barney Hill encounter, 1961. Widely considered the foundational modern abduction case, the Hills described a crew of short, gray-skinned beings with large eyes and wraparound gazes. However, their leader, who communicated with Betty Hill and examined her, was described as possessing a distinct military-like authority and standing closer to 5 feet tall. While not yet the towering tall gray of later lore, this leader established the critical archetype of the hierarchical commander aboard the craft. The birth of modern abduction research, late 1970s. For years, cases like the Hills were treated as isolated oddities. That changed when artist and investigator Budd Hopkins began systematically interviewing ordinary people who reported missing time, strange memories, and physical marks. Published in 1981, Hopkins' groundbreaking book, Missing Time, proved that these experiences were not isolated hallucinations, but a widespread, consistent phenomenon. As Hopkins and fellow researchers pooled their case files, a recurring character began to surface. Not just the small, bustling workers, but an imposing, silent figure watching from the shadows. The 1980s, the doctor classification, and the rise of the supervisor. By the mid-negative 1980s, as thousands of hypnotic regression sessions were cross-examined by independent therapists, researchers, and writers, the hierarchy within the craft became undeniable. This era birthed the formal categorization of the tall gray, or supervisor. Whitley Strieber's Communion, 1987. When author Whitley Strieber published his memoir detailing his terrifying nocturnal encounters in upstate New York, he brought the reality of these entities into the mainstream literary conversation. Alongside short, bustling entities, Strieber vividly described encountering a tall, slender figure with deep, dark eyes and an overwhelming intellectual presence, solidifying the image of the commanding entity in the public consciousness. The doctor persona in clinical literature. Researchers like Dr. David Jacobs, a Temple University historian specializing in abduction, and Dr. John E. Mack, a Harvard Medical School psychiatrist, began publishing exhaustive clinical studies based on hundreds of subjects. Under deep hypnosis, abductees across different states, backgrounds, and without prior knowledge of one another painted identical portraits of the tall grays. They were given functional titles by abductees, most commonly the doctors or the directors. While the smaller, 3 to 4 foot grays executed the physical tasks, guiding the witness onto tables or handling medical instruments, the tall grays stood at a distance, observing the procedure with cold, clinical detachment. Witnesses reported that the tall grays possessed an intense, localized telepathic field. They did not need to speak aloud. Their mere presence projected absolute authority, compelling physical paralysis and complete emotional dampening in the human subject. By structuring these accounts into a cohesive taxonomy, ufologists of the 1980s transformed the tall gray from a terrifying nocturnal apparition into a formalized archetype. the administrative mastermind of an unrecognized systematic intelligence operating right under humanity's nose. The physiological profile of the tall gray, as synthesized from decades of abduction literature and hypnotic regression archives, represents one of the most clinically consistent descriptions in ufology. While smaller grays are often viewed as utilitarian workers or drones, the tall grays possess an anatomical structure that suggests an advanced, highly specialized, or engineered biological framework. Stature, skeletal structure, and proportions. Standing between 6 and 8 feet tall, tall grays present an imposing yet profoundly fragile physical presence. Their skeletal structure is exceptionally slender, lean, and elongated. They lack the muscle mass associated with terrestrial vertebrates of that height, suggesting a biology optimized for low gravity environments or purely mechanical, non-labor-intensive lifestyle. Their arms and legs are remarkably long and thin. Abductees frequently note that their fingers are long, tapered, and highly articulate, numbering either 4 or 5, often ending in subtle pads rather than sharp nails. Their necks are notoriously thin and elongated, creating a striking visual imbalance. Witnesses under hypnosis often remarked on how the fragile neck seemed barely capable of supporting the massive, oversized skull resting atop it. The cranial architecture and facial morphology. The facial features of the tall gray are designed to evoke an immediate psychological reaction, stripping away human warmth and replacing it with pure, unmitigated intellect. Their heads are disproportionately large and hydrocephalic in appearance, swelling significantly at the temples and tapering dramatically down to a narrow, sharp chin. The eyes are universally described as the focal point of the entity. They are massive, almond-shaped, all-wraparound structures that extend far toward the sides of the skull. They feature a solid, ink-black or obsidian-like surface, resembling a dark reflective visor rather than a biological eye, completely lacking irises, pupils, or sclera, whites. Noses are typically reduced to 2 subtle nostrils or small slits, and the mouth is usually depicted as a thin, lipless horizontal line that almost never moves, as spoken communication is entirely absent. Skin texture, color, and dermal integrity. The tactile and visual qualities of a tall gray skin separate them distinctly from other humanoid archetypes. Unlike the smooth porcelain of humanoids or the chalk-white translucence of the Nevada tall whites, tall gray skin is consistently described as being an uninviting shade of ash gray, slate, or dusty blue-gray. Rather than being soft or supple, witnesses who inadvertently touched or brushed against them described the texture as resembling dry parchment, elephant hide, or fine. Stretched leather that often felt unnervingly damp or cool to the touch, entirely devoid of normal mammalian body heat. Hairlessness. Their entire bodies are completely hairless, lacking even eyebrows or eyelashes, further accentuating their alien biological construct aesthetic. Perhaps the most terrifying aspect of the tall gray encounter is not physical, but neurological. Tall grays never use vocal cords. There is no sound of breath, whispering, or spoken words. Abductees report that communication is executed via direct telepathic projection. This is not a gentle two-way conversation. Witnesses describe it as an overwhelming wave of forced thoughts, abstract concepts, emotional dampening, or high-definition visual imagery thrust directly into their conscious minds. The combination of their towering height, massive black eyes, and telepathic field acts as an immediate override mechanism. Witnesses report that a mere glance from a tall gray induces instant motor paralysis, stripping away the ability to scream, move, or fight back, leaving the human subject entirely compliant on the examination table. In the literature compiled by pioneering researchers like Dr. David Jacobs, Temple University professor and author of Secret Life, and Dr. John E. Mack, Harvard psychiatrist and author of Abduction, tall grays occupied a distinct bureaucratic and clinical role. While the shorter 4-foot grays performed the physical grunt work of moving abductees, guiding them onto tables and executing routine collection tasks, the tall grays stood back, watched, and directed the operation. They were almost universally described as cold, detached, and utterly devoid of malice, yet completely lacking in empathy. Abductees frequently referred to them as the doctors or the directors. They manage the genetic extraction protocols, reproductive sampling, and psychological tracking that form the core of the alleged hybridization program. Witnesses frequently reported an overwhelming sense of psychological dominance. The tall gray did not need physical restraints. A single glance from their massive black eyes could induce instantaneous paralysis, compliance, or amnesia in a human subject. The tall gray represents the administrative apex of the classic abduction narrative. While short grays became the face of popular media, the tall grays were the shadowed figures behind the curtain, representing a chillingly clinical, hive-minded authority that dominated the psychological landscape of 1980s and 1990s abduction literature. To be continued. Watch and listen. Watch the cinematic video trailer. Listen to the full podcast now. Explore the archive Cosmic Awakening Volume 1, 1991, Peru, Journey into the Unknown. Sacred Valley of the Incas. Volume 2, Ascension 2012, The Golden Alchemy. Part 3, The First Contact and the Paranormal State. Join the journey. New episodes drop periodically. Each chapter delivers a tight, hyper-focused 10 to 30-minute exploration into the evolution of ufology, perfect for your daily plunge into decoding hidden messages from outer space, designed to raise awareness and foster human evolution. Subscribe to support your inner development. Thumbs up to help push our channel through the algorithm. Comment below. Share your thoughts on today's episode.